For more than 50 years, he avoided crashing guitars, developing an addiction, and becoming involved in controversies. Paul Rodgers never claimed to be a legend, never trashed a stage, and never pursued the party life. However, Freddie Mercury once referred to him as England's best rock vocalist. At one point, he used a single note to quiet whole stadiums. He performed with Jimmy Page, sat in for Freddie and Queen, and co-wrote classic rock hits with The Firm, Bad Company, and Free. But he distanced himself at the height of his fame. He decided to write blues in a quiet room while everyone else followed trends. Paul Rodgers persevered, silently but resolutely, while his contemporaries succumbed to alcoholism and narcotics. At the age of 73, he has returned with a new record following 2 strokes and over 11 mini-strokes that almost took away his voice. Singing as though life still had stories to tell us what he has always done, not to prove anything or hold on to his popularity. This is not a rock star story, rather, it is the story of a man who will not die and of a voice that is quiet but persistent, burning season after season like an ember that will not go out. Childhood. On December 17, 1949, Paul Bernard Rodgers was born in Middlesbrough, a smoky industrial town in northeastern England where the morning ritual included the smell of coal and the sound of ship horns. While his mother, who is seldom ever featured in the media, was a stay-at-home mom who looked after the kids in the house, his father was a painter in the building sector. The Rodgers family was solely from the working class. No connections to the entertainment industry, no artistic legacy, and most definitely not the kind of area where individuals aspired to pursue careers in music. Paul was one of 3 brothers' middle children. Their little home was in a humble area where children grew up playing street football, playing in the mud, and spending their evenings crowded around an antiquated radio. According to Rodgers, the first thing that changed for him was hearing Ray Charles's voice on that radio in the living room. Ray's yearning soulfulness in holding each note was what stopped the 10-year-old youngster cold, not the beat. Paul started listening to soul and blues songs in secret every night after that, learning to imitate the phrasing of artists like Muddy Waters, Sam Cooke, and Otis Redding. His parents never discouraged him from pursuing the arts, even though no one in his family did. In fact, by allowing him to practice in the garden shed, they subtly encouraged his interest. Paul and a few buddies created the Roadrunners, his first school band, when he was 14 years old. He sang lead vocals and played bass. Although they only made pocket change performing at small local taverns and school celebrations, they were bursting with enthusiasm. While his peers pursued technical college or factory work, Paul discreetly but firmly started thinking about a career in music. His decision to leave his hometown and relocate to London after high school graduation was audacious for a young man with no money, no connections, only a voice, and the hazy conviction that if he didn't do it now, he never would. It was in London, surrounded by hundreds of rowdy bars and innumerable struggling bands, that the original members of the band Free were introduced to Paul Rodgers. However, he had a rare foundation with him before the stage lights ever turned on. A modest enough upbringing to build grit, but not a terrible one. Not glitzy, but emotionally charged enough to create a voice that could quiet the rock world. Early career Paul Rodgers soon came to terms with one hard reality after relocating to London from Middlesbrough in the late 1960s. Dreamers were not intended for this city. Here, music was more than simply art, it was a sport. It was a matter of survival. Every night, hundreds of bands performed. Thousands of voices swelled and then disappeared. However, Rodgers quickly gained recognition thanks to his warm, rich, and inherently soulful voice. At first, he was a member of a little band named Brown Sugar, but they were unsuccessful. A young guitarist named Paul Kossoff managed to meet Rodgers during a performance at Finsbury Park. Kossoff was immediately impressed by the way Rodgers sang an American blues song, as though it were his first language. The two hit it off right away, and a few weeks later they formed a new band called Free with drummer Simon Kirke and 15-year-old bassist Andy Fraser. The band's average age was only 18 when they made their official debut in 1968. Rodgers himself proposed the name Away as a statement of artistic freedom, away from the pop formulas that dominated the era. Tons of Sobs, the band's debut album, was released a year after they signed with Island Records. The album received critical acclaim despite its lack of financial success, particularly for Rodgers' vocal performance, which distinguished itself by fusing emotional depth with sheer wildness. However, the song All Right Now, which Rodgers and Fraser co-wrote 10 minutes after a lackluster performance in Durham, and their third album, Fire and Water, 1970, marked the true turning point. In just one summer, the song went from being an obscure band to a worldwide success, and no one could have predicted that it would become one of the defining rock anthems of the 1970s. In addition to reaching the top 5 in the US and the UK, the song was played on American radio over 1 million times, which is uncommon for a band that is so new. Traveled throughout North America and Europe from 1970 to 1972. However, internal conflicts started to show when the stage lights were at their brightest. One of Kossoff's challenges was addiction. Rodgers and Andy Fraser had a creative disagreement, and the band disbanded in 1971 while they were all just in their early 20s. Despite their brief reunion, Free's chemistry was never quite the same. Paul Rodgers left after the release of the Heartbreaker album in 1973, bringing with him the experience and a fully developed voice necessary to start a new chapter in his life by starting his own band. Paul Rodgers had already established his career with his voice alone, untrained and unrefined, but strong enough to command the industry's attention, before the world recognized him as Bad Company. He was more than just a singer with Free, he was also a lyricist, a spiritual guide, and the man who stoked the blues rock movement during a time when psychedelic and glam were in vogue. Although it was a brief start, it was more than plenty to demonstrate that Rodgers was a force to be reckoned with, not just a budding star. Prosperous career. Following his departure from Free in 1973, Paul Rodgers took his time returning to the public eye. Rather than being the 20-year-old child from an industrial town, he spent a few months thinking and producing music for the first time with the perspective of an adult. Mick Ralphs, the former guitarist of Mott the Hoople, called him during this time, and the two of them came up with a catchy yet impactful name for their new band. Bad Company was the first band signed to Led Zeppelin's company, Swan Song Records. The ensemble had direct production, distribution, and promotion support from Jimmy Page and Peter Grant. With Rodgers on vocals, Ralphs on guitar, Simon Kirka on drums, and B.A.S. Burrell on bass, the band swiftly rose to prominence as a new representation of hard rock in the 1970s. In addition to being a commercial triumph, their 1974 first album Bad Company went platinum and peaked at number 1. In addition to being on the Billboard chart, it established a unique sound, raw, emotive rock that was unpretentious in technique but brimming with soul. The song Can't Get Enough became a global sensation. Each song, including Feel Like Making Love, Shooting Star, and Ready for Love, demonstrated Rodgers' talent for using music to convey tales. He didn't compose songs to showcase his vocals. He performed as though he were speaking, confessing, and imparting things that only those with experience could comprehend. Rodgers stood out even more because he took a back seat in a society where vocalists are constantly trying to impress. Bad Company performed hundreds of gigs throughout the world and put out 6 consecutive successful albums between 1974 and 1982. Even though he was occasionally exhausted by the band's intense touring, Rodgers was still the group's leader in soul. However, in the early 1980s, when synth-pop and new wave music took over, he made the surprising decision to take a break and concentrate on his family. Just a man who knew when to leave, without any controversies or theatrical exits. After taking a few years off, Rodgers made a comeback in 1984 with the unusual project The Firm, which he co-founded with guitar great Jimmy Page. Zeppelin led. Even though the band disbanded in 1986, they made a lasting impression with 2 albums and songs including Satisfaction Guaranteed and Radioactive. This stage gave Rodgers the chance to try new things and develop his musical range, even though it wasn't as explosive as Bad Company. Paul Rodgers started a new path. After leaving The Firm, a solo career in which he had complete creative autonomy and didn't need to reach an agreement or make any concessions. He started by removing himself from the cacophonous realm of show business. Cut Loose, his first solo album, was released in 1983 and was a very personal record in every way. He produced the album himself, composed it, sang, and performed most of the instruments. It was designed to set him free, not to sell. One of the highlights, Live in Peace, would subsequently be re-recorded with The Firm, but in its original form, it maintained a more straightforward, honest tone. Despite not creating a marketing frenzy, Cut Loose was a subdued announcement. Rodgers was a real artist, not just a singer. He took part in a number of live projects in the years that followed, but it wasn't until 1993 that he put out one of his most iconic solo albums, Muddy Water Blues, a tribute to Muddy Waters. A sincere tribute to blues great Muddy Waters, whom Rodgers regarded as the source of his musical spirit. His all-star roster of rock and blues guitarists, including Brian May, Queen, Gary Moore, Jeff Beck, David Gilmour, Pink Floyd, and others, made it anything but a cover record. A sophisticated synthesis of rock and blues that is both contemporary and nostalgic was produced by combining Rodgers' soulful white voice with his skillful guitar playing. The Grammy-nominated record is still regarded as one of his most prestigious and ambitious works. Rodgers persisted in his solo career by putting out live albums and reworking his timeless hits in novel ways. He did a lot of touring in Europe and North America in the 2000s, playing not only Free and Bad Company songs but also the classic blues tunes he was up on. His solo performances were never ostentatious. Just a tight backup band, a basic microphone, and a middle-aged man wearing a leather jacket. No special effects. only an expressive, resonant voice that was astonishingly intact. Despite not releasing a studio album, Rodgers continues to perform at important events between 2009 and 2017. Charity concerts, blues festivals, and vintage rock performances. Legends like Al Green once occupied the famous Royal Studios in Memphis, Tennessee, where he recorded a special project known as the Royal Sessions, which he released in 2014. The CD included timeless soul and blues songs like That's How Strong My Love Is and I've Been Loving You Too Long, which were performed by a vocalist whose voice had aged but was still strong. It was dubbed an album sung from memory by critics. Next, Paul Rodgers made a significant comeback to the studio in 2023 with his brand new album, Midnight Rose, which was his first original release in almost 25 years. Following 2 severe strokes that almost took away his ability to talk, the album was created. However, Rodgers sung in a blues-infused, deeper, more soulful tone rather than moaning. Paul Rodgers doesn't follow charts or aim to appeal to the masses, as if to convey that music has never left him and that he is still here. He just sings since he has done so since he was a young lad growing up in a modest Middlesbrough home and listening to Ray Charles. And he might continue to do so until he is unable to sing anymore. Just music and a voice that has never deceived itself, no spotlights needed. Private life. Paul Rodgers preferred to live to a totally different beat than many rock musicians of his day, who were notorious for their noisy relationships, partying, and romantic scandals. He was never named as one of rock's bad boys, he was never called a rebellious icon, and he was virtually never featured in tabloid magazines. But it was exactly this silence that set him apart. His personal life turned into a source of stability, depth, and equilibrium. Not devastation. Rodgers married Michiko Shimizu, a Japanese woman he met in the 1970s, for the first time. Together, they had 2 children during their more than 20-year marriage, a girl who has mostly remained out of the spotlight and Steve Rodgers, who would go on to seek a career in music. Those who have worked with Paul describe him as a gentle, kind parent who was always there when needed, despite the fact that he rarely discusses his personal life. He left the spotlight while Bad Company was at its height, not for work-related reasons but just to spend more time with his family. Rodgers achieved the exact opposite in a field that frequently compromises privacy for celebrity. He prioritized his private life over the stage lights. Rodgers was unmarried for many years after splitting from Michiko until he met Cynthia Kerluck, the former Miss Canada. Is a well-known fitness expert on television. They still reside at their oceanfront property in British Columbia, Canada, where they were married in a modest, private ceremony in 2007. You don't need a lavish wedding at this age, according to Rodgers. All you need is someone to accompany you on life's quieter moments. He practices yoga, hikes, and gardens while living in Canada, remote from large towns. Routines that have enabled him to sustain his mental and physical toughness after decades of traveling. However, that apparently tranquil existence was put to the test in 2016 when he had a significant stroke that affected his speech immediately. However, he had a second stroke in 2019 in addition to 11 smaller strokes prior to and following it. I was unable to talk. I was unable to sing. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever be capable of again, Rodgers shared in a rare interview after his recovery. A 6.5-hour decompression surgery to relieve arterial pressure was miraculously successful, but it was his calm mindset, the unwavering support of Cynthia and a disciplined lifestyle that enabled him to fully recover, eventually returning to the studio and releasing Midnight Rose just a few years later. We don't talk about what was lost. We talk about what's still here, his spouse told the Canadian press. Although Paul Rodgers has never exploited his private life to attract attention, his silent struggles, from the dissolution of a marriage to silent parenting to battling a disease that almost silenced him, all point to the same conclusion. The strength of this man is that he doesn't have to prove it. Praise is unnecessary for him. Doesn't require a sign because his peaceful, devoted, and meaningful real life is already a lovely, wordless melody, legacy, and influence. It was never Paul Rodgers' name that made headlines in newspapers. He didn't have the recognizable face of Mick Jagger, he didn't lead a single, renowned band like Freddie Mercury, and he never had any scandals that stoked behind-the-scenes rumors. However, legends consistently bring up his voice, the true voice. To the surprise of those outside the music industry, Paul Rodgers was voted 55th out of the 100 greatest vocalists of all time by Rolling Stone magazine, above several well-known figures. However, that rating was not surprising to producers, musicians, or singers. Rodgers was previously referred to as England's best rock vocalist by Freddie Mercury. Brian May went straighter. I've performed with a lot of vocalists, but Paul Rodgers is the only one who gets me to pause and pay attention. Rodgers was a master of self-control and inner strength, in contrast to many of his contemporaries who depended on techniques of loudness, pitch, or growling. He could perform a ballad with compassion and depth, transition into hard rock with grounded intensity, or sing the blues like a black American who was born in the South. Time did not break his voice. It matured similarly to a good wine. Not like anything tainted by drunkenness. Generation after generation has been impacted by him. Paul Rodgers has been highlighted by David Coverdale, Deep Purple, Whitesnake, Bruce Dickinson, Iron Maiden, Joe Bonamassa, Chris Cornell, Kelly Hansen, and Foreigner as an example of singing that is effortless, expressive, and natural. Rodgers sung to feel, and that is what persists in a day when many singers sing to impress. In terms of music, he contributed to the very concept of contemporary blues rock by transcending its American origins and fusing it with the gritty, expressive spirit of British rock from the 1970s. He gave a deep, heartfelt energy to Free. He raised the bar for arena-ready hard rock with Bad Company. He redefined what Led Zeppelin veterans could become with The Firm, and he demonstrated with Queen that a great artist doesn't have to replace anyone. It was more than enough to be himself. Rodgers has subtly supported communal and charitable causes outside of the music industry. He has contributed show earnings to public health initiatives in Canada and the UK, animal welfare groups, and, most importantly, medical support programs after he recovered from strokes. Like his music, there were little but unmistakable acts of generosity rather than large-scale advertising campaigns. Perhaps Paul Rodgers' greatest legacy is his tenacity, integrity, and unshakable refusal to compromise quality for recognition. He continues to be a sign of stability in a field that is changing more quickly each year, where music needs simply be resilient rather than follow fads. A voice that genuinely resonates with something deep within never goes away, although faces that previously dominated television may fade from memory. And that is just what Paul Rodgers has quietly left behind. Current circumstances. Paul Rodgers doesn't dwell on the clamor of his past success. He has adopted a new cadence in his 70s, one that is calmer, slower, yet by no means idle. He now resides with his wife, Cynthia Careyluck, at a coastal house in British Columbia, Canada, following decades of performing on stages of all sizes. He continues to make songs there every day, do yoga, hike, and occasionally reappear like a tranquil grace note in an increasingly turbulent rock world, all while surrounded by pine trees and the sound of waves. Midnight Rose, Rodgers' first album of completely original, brand new songs in almost 25 years, was released in 2023. It was significant, particularly in light of the fact that he had almost lost his ability to talk and sing due to 2 major strokes and 11 smaller ones that occurred only a few years prior. His health was not the only thing saved by a 6.5-hour brain surgery. It made it possible for that voice to reappear with even greater intensity and depth. He kept pushing Midnight Rose in his own unique manner in 2024. No extensive media campaigns or tours, just a few key appearances. One of the album's most notable tunes, Photo Shooter, had a music video released in September 2024. It featured a voice that was still full of emotion and simple, elegant images. Fans had anticipated for a world tour, but Rodgers kept them updated with interviews and behind-the-scenes videos in which he talked about his road to rehabilitation and how music is still a vital aspect of life. By 2025, Rodgers is still doing substantial but subdued work. He is working on a unique project called Can't Get Enough, an homage to Bad Company, which is an album that features musicians from the rock, country, and Americana genres and celebrates the band's classics. He co-founded the band. In the fall of 2025, the project will be released, reflecting the following generation's respect of the man who paved the way, rather than nostalgia. He continues to engage with fans on social media by sharing brief updates, behind-the-scenes pictures, and daily thoughts. However, media strategy is no longer an issue for Rodgers. He doesn't listen to podcasts, live streams, or trends. He makes the decision to always be genuine while remaining just enough present. In the last 2 years, no major tours have been scheduled. In order to debunk rumors, Rodgers himself verified this. No longer have to go far to sing. On his official Twitter for Paul Rodgers, he commented, "I just need a quiet place and someone truly listening." His life as it is now is not over. The chapter is currently being written in a calm manner. He has nothing more to demonstrate what has to be sung. He sang what had to be kept alive. He still maintains his unique voice and grounded lifestyle. And an unwavering passion for music. Paul Rodgers may not have the loudest voice in the room, but when he sings, he is the one who silences the entire audience, just as he did when he first left Middlesbrough in quest of something genuine in a world that is becoming more and more manufactured by the day. The light surrounding him has never gone out, but he has never sought attention. From the surgery room back to the recording studio, from Jimmy Page to Queen, from Free to Bad Company, Paul has always stayed calm, steady, and true to himself. What about Paul Rodgers most appeals to you? Is it his commanding voice, his serene demeanor, or his steadfastness spanning over 50 years? Tell us in the comments section below. Please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you found this video to be significant. This will ensure that you don't miss any future inspirational musical excursions. Because you still have a lot of musicians to discover after Paul Rodgers. People who live their entire lives in accordance with their own truth, not only those who compose music.